Morning Express, it's a pleasure to have you with us. In case you're just joining us, we've taken a look at the press, what you should expect in today's daily, so make sure you grab yourself a copy of the Standard. But apart from that, we'll take a look at some of the stories that stood out. Kioko has besieged upon me to give him a chance to speak on the issue of financing candidates in one way or the other, because today's dailies at the Standard on page 4 has broken down how Kenya's politics risks being overrun by big money. So you'll get to know in context, one way or the other, how much you might need in case you want to vie for, let's say, a member of parliament position, an average of 18.2 million shillings, woman rep seat 22.8 million shillings, bearing in mind we have one of the most expensive elections in the world right here in Kenya. 2,700 Kenya shillings per voter. That's the cost of managing the votes. So, Kioko, add your voice to this. I don't know if you're interested in vying, but in case you are, you'll be interested in the level playing field. So talk to us about this.
I think I experienced this firsthand. In 2017, we were campaigning in Kaiti. I ran an election there, came number 2. We were grateful to the people of Kaiti for the opportunity that gave us. Of course, in 2022, we are coming back. But for the new entrants into this thing, and we need to be fair to them, you can have the 18 million and still lose the election. I think people look beyond the money, because there are candidates, there are aspirants who will give 50 bob to people, and the others will give 1,000 bob, and people will elect the one who's giving 50 bob, for whatever reason that is. So one must not look at this figure as cast in stone or say this is it or not it. Okay. There is a practical, realistic approach into this politics. The expenses in the campaign period, one looks at it as you divide it in 3 ways. There is the election, pre-election day campaign, which is the active seeking of votes, party nominations that come about it. There is the election day budget in itself, which is about getting the people out to vote, securing the vote. Then there is the post-election budget, which is how do you deal with whatever that came out of it. So there is a spread on these things, and you must ask yourself, if you divide this figure of 18 million over 60 months, which is the average period you have to popularize yourself to your people, it's really not really a big figure. But again, people want to know, if they entrust you with the national resources, how are you going to manage it? If you did not have or did not know how to manage the little that you have at an individual capacity. That is where the premium is placed there. That is why your issues even of educational qualifications are placed there, because people want to sieve jokers from real leaders that we can elect. But be it as it may, we must encourage the very best of our people at all levels to aspire to leadership. That's where we progress the country forward.
Let me ask you there, and I'm pretty sure maybe the Election Financing Act will be looking at this, but we haven't talked about the source of this money. Should we also be looking at the source of the money, perhaps what is donated to certain campaign managers, to certain parties? What say you about this, Kioko?
Yeah, you know, the source of the money must come. The conversation about the source of money must come. But are we there yet? You know, do we have the mechanism to implement it and to follow through, so that if you look and you come after me, Kioko, and say, Kioko, we are looking at the source of the money, it means the same principle must be applied to Gwanda over here. It must be applied to Jesse. That way, then it appears impartial. But if you apply that set rule on me and ignore other people, then again you create a matter out of me. People see that it is me you are persecuting and you are not applying the law equitably. So the source matters, but we are not there yet as a country.
Okay, Gwanda?
I just want to say this. The source of these funds are very, very important, but not on, MCAs, not on members of parliament, not on senators. I think the problem here is with the presidential and gubernatorial, because that's where the money is. And we've known that if you look at how President Obama campaigned, he got money from everywhere, including Middle East. But then how much was it? And President Obama went into the small guy and say, bring $20 or $10 or something like that. A presidential candidate we must know the source, because where that money comes from most possibly will influence the way we think, and so is the gubernatorial. But in these other positions, I can guarantee you that the biggest source of the money and the funds they're using is from their pocket. And you might find few people giving you money, but it will be in cash. Who will ever know that you're given X amount of money to go out there and campaign with? So to me, I think the focus is on the presidential as well as the gubernatorial, where the money is, and that money is most likely going to go back to those that give them the money for the campaign.
Okay, gentlemen, allow us to shift focus. Enough with politics. Let's talk about something to do with money, but this time in the education sector. Schools are set to reopen as of today for the first term of the 2021 academic calendar, with many parents decrying the tough economic times and the inadequate time to prepare their children to go back to school. Now, despite the challenges, long queues have been witnessed in bookshops and uniform shops as well. Alan Ochanda paints a picture for us.
A spot check at several book centers in Nairobi revealed long queues of parents who throng the centers to ensure they secure their children the necessary materials in preparation for their transition to the next classes as term 1 begins Monday. They just concluded holiday that marked end of term 3, according to parents, was not adequate, and the opening date is just too soon, denying them the opportunity to prepare their children.
Huwezi kuwa unafungua shule tarehe 26. Hatujapata mshahara. Hawa watoto tutoe shule namna gani? Tutoe nauli wapi tulipe hiyo pesa? Unafungua shule tarehe 5, 6 huko ambapo kila mtu ana mshahara yake. Ile tuwe na currency circulation. We cannot work like that, Mheshimiwa.
Some of the textbooks are a bit expensive. That's the challenge currently, but everything is fine. So far, so good. And as you can see, the line is quite too long. That can be another challenge, but yeah, so far, so good.
In Kisumu, it wasn't any different as long queues were witnessed since morning. Parents like Aden Hussein forced to brace the early morning call, but the high costs of textbooks hiking them despite the assurance from the Ministry of Education that it will secure every learner with textbooks.
Line ilikuwa mrefu na price walipeleka juu sana high. Watu wanalia hata wanaona receipts ndio hii leo ni maneno. Kitabu alikuwa ananuanga na shilingi ilikuwa ananuanga 120 hata leo wameweka mpaka 340 shillings wamepeleka bei juu sana wamepeleka. Na hata sisi imeshindwa kuafford leo kabisa.
In Meru, most book centers remained closed. Parents resorting to supermarkets for school items. One such parent, Gerald Mushigi, who has a child in grade 2, lamenting about the hard times and the many requirements for such young learners that are just too costly.
Hiyo muda ya kutafuta pesa hakuna. Shughuli za kutafuta pesa hakuna. Kazi hakuna. Mwalimu anasema mtoto asiingie shule kama hana hizo vitabu 8. Saa hii hata hii nimefurisa ndio ninunue hizi vitabu. Huyu mwingine sijui atarudi kesho ama ni kesho kutwa wiki ijayo.
Being the first time the first term of the academic calendar is coming in the middle of the year, and parents are decrying the tough economic conditions as the transition period of 1 week from term 3 to term 1 was inadequate for them to prepare to have their kids back to school. But for the Ministry of Education, it is a race against time to normalize the academic calendar. Alan Ochanda, KTN News.
Well, some, if not most parents, find themselves between a rock and a hard place, perhaps reason being the transition period. Just 1 week between terms, and within that period, you need to think about the next term fee as well. Gwanda, I'll start with you. I mean, we're all living in difficult times, and we well know of the adverse effects on the economy due to COVID-19, but the pressure on parents must be great. I don't know if you're in this position yourself, but talk to us. What say you about the school calendar as it is and the situation most parents find themselves in?
Just see, I'm just not talking about this as an analyst or a governance expert, but I'm also talking about this as a parent, one, and two, I'm talking about this as somebody who runs a private school in this country. And so, as an educator, this is something that is close to my heart. There's a parent, when that clip was going around, that said, look, it is just about a week, the students close for a week. And then he said, why do we have to open on the 26th when we've not even earned a salary? The planners of this thing, for heaven's sake, they also need to think like Kenyans, not because they are in positions of authority within the Ministry of Education. Opening school within a week from today should have given people an opportunity to get money as employees so that they can take their children to school. In my own private school, we've had issues even through this COVID since the schools opened, parents paying school fees. And it gotten worse to a point where parents are saying, I cannot afford it. I have to take my child to a public school. When they go to those public schools, they can't get desks because the public schools are getting crowded, because those who are in private schools, that most of them closed down, are now in public schools that do not have, structures, not structures, but do not have furniture. They do not have the capability. They have less teachers. They do not have, one classroom. I know of a school in Kisumu where one classroom has 120 students for that reason. So when you look at what is happening today, we are having a Ministry of Education that has lost reality and touch with the parents, unfortunately. And that can happen when you have the resources and your children are learning abroad and it's not interfered with COVID-19. Your salary really is not tagged into your school fees. But that's where the majority of Kenyans are. The books have become hugely expensive for that reason. And when you have a nation that is saying and priding itself and saying this free primary education, and parents have to scramble every time to go and buy books, then I'm wondering whether this is just hair being sold to the people out there and not the reality of free primary education. What about the uniform? Next week, Form 1s are going to school, Jesse. I know that uniform is costing between 20,000 to 22,000 shillings in most of the secondary school, in addition to the 40,000 that you're supposed to pay for school fees in full. The question is, does ordinary Kenya Wanjiku able to afford 60 to 80,000? And remember that the 25,000 is just uniform. And then there's something you call motivational fee that has to be given to people. And now schools are getting into 5,000 motivational fee. 5,000 perhaps times 2,000, 2,000 population of students is an exorbitant amount of money. The question is, why must Ministry of Education pretend that the cost of education is being subsidized while that subsidy is still being paid by parents, but in other names like motivational fee, like development fee, like uniform fee? In developed world, where we are borrowing from, whether it is in Europe or in America, people are not paying school, school uniform anymore. The question is, why must I just be directed to a specific store to pay there so that it benefits a principal? I'm not saying that all principals are bad, but this is a practice that must be stopped. Where, in addition of school fees, will people be required to pay over 22,000? That a tracksuit alone, Jesse, I'm breaking this thing down so that you see how expensive it is. A tracksuit alone is going at a cost of between 2,000 to 2,500. There are suits here that are about 3,000 and they're business suits. Why would a student tracksuit? And the cost of that tracksuit is perhaps about 1,400 or about 1,200. So where does this 1,500 plus go to? And those are the questions we need to ask ourselves. Can everybody be liberalized, therefore, to sell this uniform so that it's not only tagged to a specific shop, and if you don't buy from that shop, your child will be sent away? I think Ministry of Education still has a lot to do. They are full in the media every single day, but they need to get to the nitty-gritties of what is happening. And for your information, now if you're changing school to another, especially from one, if for one reason a child is not able to afford that school and he has to take a parent has to take that child to a day school, what's going to happen is these people will ask you for 5,000 or 10,000 before they change that, and then they ask you to pay school fees in full in addition. In other words, they're punishing you for bringing that child in that school instead of encouraging you to bring that child to that school. Ministry of Education must not just talk big, but I really think they must now talk into nitty-gritties. The parents have this information and can provide it for them. Which school is charging what? If they don't want to act on this, they're pretending that they're managing free primary education and subsidy in secondary school while they're cashing in it.
Kyoko, what do you wish to this? The Ministry of Education has definitely pushed on 100% transition, and the schools might expect a bulge in the number of student population due to that. KUPPET Secretary General is quoted in today's papers just saying it's difficult to comprehend how the government wants to handle the quality of education. There are schools without basic infrastructure like laboratories, and in this day and age, it's not just access to education, it's all to do with the quality of education as well. What say you about this?
I think I'm in agreement in totality with what my fellow panelist Aganda said. I have a daughter who's going to Form 1, and a daughter who did well by all standards, got chosen to a school that she did not select, a public school that she did not select, and now we are forced to look for an alternative private school. And when you look at the fee structure and you look at the things you're buying, and it's really demoralizing. It's really demoralizing. Education has become very expensive. Not that ignorance is cheaper. And one of the things that when the CS Magoha took over the reins of Ministry of Education, many people had a lot of hopes in him to come and disentangle a lot of old prejudices and a lot of old norms that were happening in the Ministry of Education. We thought he would address the question of quality. We thought he would address the question of cartels within that ministry. We thought he would break down this education thing into a manner that made sense to all of us as a society. However, every time he opens his mouth, every time he comes out to speak, it shows how disconnected he is with the public feeling and with the public perception of the Ministry of Education. The insensitivity of closing third term on a week ago, Friday, opening schools within 7 days. These are kids who are transitioning from old school. Those who are in grade 5 or who are in grade 4 are going to grade 5. New materials are needed. New textbooks are needed. New exercise books are needed. These kids have grown. A new uniform is coming. Everything is new. That is what it calls the moving from one old class to the next class. And these are all expenses to be incurred. This is the same parent whose economic power has been diminished on account of COVID, whose economic power has been diminished on account of the huge taxes this government is placing on him, whose economic power has been diminished on account of huge bills that the parents are facing. And you are giving him 1 week only to ensure the kid reports to school tomorrow. That is the greatest height of insensitivity by a government on its people. Now, what do you do about it? People will struggle. People will run to Shylocks, yeah? Because this 1 week, people say lazima ujipange, but you must look at it historically. Schools in December holiday used to close in November, open in January. There was a 2 months window for parents to plan themselves to be able to, for their kids to move into the next level. This is incentive. This is very wrong. I wish it would have been a different approach. I wish that program would have been looked at holistically. Yes, there is a time preference of saying the kids who did standard 8 in April, yeah, had stayed too long at home before joining Form 1. That's a special category of students that needed to be weaned out properly so that those who are in class as late as last week do not have to suffer. Okay. Now, I would wish, again, on the question of quality, because it shows it is not about ensuring 100%. I think that's a nice goal. But if 100% transition means the quality of education is compromised, then we are basically churning out cramists. We are basically churning out people who will not be able to uphold the values that come with our education system. So we need to be very careful. You've seen... I'm trying to be very polite on this issue because this is our kids. It's the future of our country. And you don't want to point fingers at anybody. We need a collective stakeholder approach to redefine so that we don't mess up a generation because of wrong priorities within the education sector.
All right. Agwanda, add your voice to that 100% transition policy. Others might argue it has not been anchored on various key pillars. And when we talk of key pillars, financing, staffing, infrastructure, equipment, teaching and learning resources, because we need to do it in a way that it doesn't increase inequality within the education sector. Well, what's your view of this as an educator, perhaps?
I think this is the highest decit of our education career in this country. Even Professor Magoha sat in a class, I believe, and he sat in many, many classes. And when he was in primary, there are people he left in class 8 that never went to high school. When he was in high school, there are people he left that never went to college. You know, and when he was in college doing his first degree, undergraduate, bachelor's, a number of people that perhaps are more successful than him that just finished their undergraduate, and that was it. You know, and he became a professor. There are fewer professors in this country, but it doesn't mean that the country is not moving forward. What I am saying is the 100% transition is a hogwash, in my view. It is practically impossible in any nation, in any government. It is not possible. This is just something where they've, you know, for the sake of donors and for the sake of the international community and for the sake of planning, but it doesn't mean that it's achievable. 100% is not achievable because there are people that are not cut for academics. They're not cut for, you know, for going to university. They're not cut for going to secondary school. And it doesn't mean that they're bad people, but they just decided where I am in class 8 is enough. I'm going to go to Juakali, where I repair my car. You find some young people that have come there. After 2-3 years, they're some of the experts you have in Juakali. And so my view is we cannot possibly uphold this thing and force it through the high school and say 100% transition must be done. It is practically impossible. Even if you look at, you know, the mortality rate in schools, you know that kids that are perhaps from class 8 and going to secondary school, fewer of them will have passed on before they go to class 8, and fewer of them will have passed on before they go to college, whether it's middle colleges or university. What I'm saying, it's something that we need to consider, and especially when you talk about 100% transition, and you know that the numbers of primary school are way higher than the numbers of secondary school, who are you cheating in this country? I mean, we know that it is not practically possible. And if it is practically possible, then it cannot just be by improvement of school desk like they did just more recently. I wish that school desk motto would have gone also with more classrooms, and not just more classrooms, TSC also coming out and saying that we will have the exact number of teachers we have in primary school in high school. That is not. The disparity is so huge. And so this thing of the government saying 100% transition, it's not possible. And the more they talk about it, is the more they are distanced with the reality, just like Yoko was saying, that perhaps they're in these offices and they're getting reports and saying, good, good, good. And there is no day that they've ever come out and said, we've now achieved the 100% transition. They know it is not possible. I wish they will come out periodically and say, we've not been able to achieve this, so let's adjust these statistics and say, instead of 100%, Mr. President, let's put it 90% so that we are near where we are. You can have goals, but when you are implementing, definitely you'll have something else. But you need to adjust to it instead of sticking to what you know is an impossibility.
Okay, I'll be the government's defender. At least they're hiring 5,000 teachers yearly in terms of capacity building. I'm sure that might help. Final word, Kyoko?
You know, also, we beyond this transition, beyond this KCP, this term issue, a curriculum is being changed. A curriculum that is shaping our children for the future. Today, you must ask yourself, in a rural constituency like Kaiti, in a rural constituency like Karachuonyo, in a rural constituency like Lungalunga, Msambweni, how are the educational stakeholders in those constituencies prepared for a local primary school called Kivutini Primary becoming Kivutini Junior Primary and Junior Secondary? How are they prepared in making the decision that Kivutini Primary will become an arts-based center or will become a science-based center? How are they preparing people to make a decision that Ukia Primary is going, or Rukia Secondary, or Kinyuani Secondary for that matter, is going to be a junior secondary and a higher secondary. What is the conversation around that? And what are the infrastructural needs that are needed in those schools so that the students or the community there gets involved and be able to compete with students in Nairobi?
Okay.
The majority of schools in the rural constituency, let me say this, majority of schools in the rural constituency are church-based schools. Is the conversation involving church as major stakeholders in those schools and how they reflect infrastructure-wise for implementation of CBC? How is the lack of electricity? How are certain infrastructure, you know, there's a deeper conversation that needs to happen that I believe that had CS Magoha spearheaded it or appeared to, so that as we talk about BBI, as we talk about bottom-top approach, as we talk about the civil service, we are having a stakeholder conversation at the local level, because next year, the children who are now joining grade 5, next year there'll be a national examination on grade 6. How are we preparing ourselves to deal with the apparent influx of kids who are 12 years old being called, they are now going into secondary, vis-a-vis kids who are 14 going into formal? Those dynamics, I think we need to have an honest conversation, not a bravado contest, not a brickmanship. Let us have an honest conversation so that we do not mess, we do not have a guinea pig experience with our young ones.
Yeah, exactly. We need to secure the future of the generation, yeah. Briefly, yeah.
Yeah, just one thing I want to say.
Okay.
This was an opportunity for the Minister of Education and CS Magoha to look at the calendar, the education calendar, to be in tandem with what the international community is having. I don't know why, as Kyoko was saying, is rushing us into having a 1 week. It is not wrong. COVID has pushed us to a point where we can think differently. If the 844 system or the CBC curriculum is coming up, and we know that it's going to be a transition, for that reason, there's been a lot of discussion in this country as to whether we can be in tandem with the school calendar in the UK or in Europe, because most of our students go out there. It is also possible that during this time we could have actually restructure our calendar to seasons, because the international community are using seasons as their education calendar. And I think it is also good that when we are done perhaps by June and we are having 2 months summer holiday like those other people have in the international community, then we could transition into then September we start again. That way we will not have to rush to close for one week. I believe there was a reason for a 2-month closure between November and December. A parent will have at least earned a 2-month wage, and for that 2-month wage it can now take his children to school. And even if it's done by June and July and August, people go to school as a long holiday time, it is also possible so that you give parents enough time. But we should not be rushing to this. We are not dying. The country is not dying. The education sector is not dying, plus the official that they must rush the closing to be within 1 week. And if anything, this is a calamity. This is a pandemic that is world over. People will understand. We'll have wasted a year, but the reality is when those days when people were going to college, they used to take about a year out of school before they went to college. Were they lesser student or lesser, performed student than we are? Absolutely not. So, CS Magoha and his Minister of Education must restructure this in the interest of economic issues, in the interest of how well parents will be prepared to take their children to school, but not on rushing us that we must conform to a particular calendar.
Okay, let's see what develops today. Definitely sharp criticism right there, but well placed. We'll definitely highlight the state of preparedness in various learning institutions right today as schools reopen. Make sure you tune in to KTN News for that. Let's shift focus, gentlemen. I'd like to hear what you have to say on the issues pitting the judiciary. And just recently, last week, we saw reprieve for 2 judges of the High Court. That's one, Justice Chitembwe and Justice Aggrey Muchelule, after obtaining orders to stop their arrest and prosecution in court. This came on a day the police came under heavy criticism over an incident in which they arrested the two judges before releasing them on Thursday last week. Meanwhile, the Chief Justice, Martha Koome, has said her office was not notified about the arrest of the two judges. George Maringa with this report.
The events of Thursday afternoon, where judges of the High Court Said Juma Chitembwe and Aggrey Muchelule were arrested, attracted anger, condemnation and shock. The two were picked up by DCI detectives, their offices searched over bribery allegations.
Serious.
And a few hours later, the Director of Public Prosecutions, Nurdin Haji, distanced himself and his office from the arrest, saying he was not aware why the two were arrested. But the two judges were not going to take it lying down. They launched a fight back to stop any further action by the Directorate of Criminal Investigations, DCI, to prosecute them. Orders which they were granted after filing an application in court.
Why could the judges be arrested? And there was no evidence. There was no evidence. The money that was alleged to have been there, the judges have not been furnished with who is the complainant, which case that was supposed to have the money being transacted. The 5 million that is alleged to have been given, who received the money and where is that money? So it is a serious question that we have raised, and we hope that the Constitutional Court will agree with us and make clear orders that the two judges should not be arrested and should not be charged for flimsy, trumped-up charges that do not hold any water. The actions of the DCI was aimed, one, to embarrass the judges, to humiliate the judges.
The Thursday incident against the two judges eliciting mixed reactions from different quarters. From the Kenya Magistrates and Judges Association through lawyer Cliff Ombeta, Dunstan Omari and Shadrack Omboi questioned the move of the arrest, which was not explained to the two judges. Senior Counsel Bar Chairman Fred Jambo, on the other hand, saying the arrest of the High Court judges was an attack on the judiciary.
We are not saying that anybody is beyond search or arrest, but what we are saying is that we must do so with the dignity that the Constitution expects of everyone, judges not accepted. It was wrong to have gone on the way they did, and the Directorate of Criminal Investigation must explain why he did that, why the judge was put through that haranguing, belittling and undignified treatment by the state. That is something that cannot be countenanced. It cannot be expected of people of irresponsible behavior. And so we are, without a doubt at all, condemning that action by the Directorate of Investigation.
However, according to Chief Justice Martha Koome, DCI detectives did not notify her before arresting Justices Aggrey Muchelule and Said Chitembwe. In a statement, CJ Koome, who is also the chairperson of the Judicial Service Commission, assured all judges and judicial officers that the independence of the judiciary and their constitutional duties are protected by the Constitution. But the bigger question remains on the legality of the actions by the DCI. Many have questioned why the DCI disregarded the Judicial Service Commission, which is the mandated body to receive complaints, investigate and remove from office or otherwise discipline registrars, magistrates and other judicial officers. Justice Muchelule is among the judges that President Uhuru Kenyatta failed to appoint, while Justice Chitembwe threw his hat in the ring for the positions of Chief Justice and Judge of the Supreme Court. George Maringa, KTN News.
Okay, gentlemen, we'll be brief about this. I'd like your take on the process, especially in terms of judges and magistrates. Are they immune from prosecution, or do they have VIP management? In terms of VIP management, we're talking about the JSC. But Kyoko, what happens if I get into an altercation with a judge right here now? Something bad happens and I want to raise criminal proceedings. Do I walk to the court of law, DCI, or I first go through JSC, get him removed from the bar, and then now I can proceed?
Very quickly, the Constitution provides for the independence of the judiciary and provides for the mechanism of removal of judges and magistrates in a very impartial manner, who to set up, to do the investigation, who do you report to, in a manner that they can, we've seen the judiciary taking actions for fellow judges. Justice Mativo, Justice Mutava was removed recommended for removal by the JSC. So there is no shortcut, because we are coming from a history where the state used to oppress judges. It will use the secret, the people based at Nyayo House that particular time, arrest judges, torture them, and then judges would come and read a ruling favorable to the executive at that time. So when the new constitution was being passed, certain safeguards were placed. Certain safeguards were placed to ensure executive overtures and overburdens into the judiciary are limited. It doesn't place anybody above the law. It is just mechanism. There's a mechanism set that must be followed. The sad bit about it is that we have the head of DCI who happens to be very happy to shoot first and then aim later. And therefore, we find ourselves misfiring on many occasions. If there was this allegation, I believe it could have been handled in a different, better way, and a different outcome, I think, would be achieved. Nobody is above the law. However, where mechanisms are provided on how to handle certain institutional office, those mechanisms by law must be followed.
All right.
EACC was not involved.
Okay.
The Judicial Service Commission was not involved. The Director of Public Prosecution was not involved. So you go in, what you're looking for you don't get. You don't even take the time to appraise people. I got this information, and this is what we were looking for. So we are all left with innuendos and speculations, and which basically hurt the image of the executive, or basically go back and say President Uhuru Kenyatta is very serious on revisiting the judiciary. And it might not have been the thing. Okay. So the DCI needs to manage itself properly.
Go and add your voice to this, because it's all to do with maintaining respect for the office, not necessarily the individual. Well, what say you about the process, briefly?
First of all, if I were to invite the DCI director on this matter, perhaps there are things that happen that should not have happened. The judge's chamber is an official court for that judge. He has rulings that are already made. He has rulings that are in process. He has cases and evidences perhaps that are there that are not supposed to be exposed to a third eye for that reason, because then that jeopardizes the sanity of those cases. Now, if you had somebody advising the DCI, who would have told him that the worst place you want to go to and perhaps get an eye over your head is the judge's chamber, because you put all those cases that he's working on in jeopardy. And somebody can go to court later on after these judges have made the ruling and say that it was compromised because there was an access into those files. Before the DCI went into these offices, they should have had their intelligence with the greatest integrity to say that indeed, if it is the money that we are talking about, I've just put it there and it has not left that place. Now, since it left that place, say it left that place, however it did, and this, ox eyes did not see, the problem is it leaves the DCI with the bad public image that it should not have. Before you arrest a judge, and again you ask Kyoko a question that I want to delve into, is it possible that you could have an altercation with the judge and pursue a private prosecution? It is possible. However, upon arrest of that judge, the next thing should be taking him to court, and not to release him because you don't have evidence. You need to arrest him and make sure he goes to court. And then if you do that and there's validity for JSC to come in, then they will see a process that has started and the evidence. But again, you cannot do that without the DPP. The DPP, if he says, I'm not prosecuting this case, an egg on your face again. The question is, are we seeing a situation where there's still rivalry between the office of the DPP and the DCI? If that's the case, then we are yet to lose credibility in our prosecution process, and we're yet to lose even credibility in the in judiciary. I finish by saying this. Do not create animosity between judiciary and DCI, because at the end of the day, whether it is DPP, whether it's judiciary, whether it is DCI, they'll have to go back to the judiciary. And if they have a problem with you, those cases will be lost.
Interesting. Let's see how it plays out, especially with the word that the government might be using law enforcement agencies to serve their purposes. Especially this talk has rived with the arrest of the Mathira Member of Parliament, Gachagua. We'll definitely see how it plays